me a great pleasure to welcome you all to the 16th edition of School of Tomorrow events, Guardians of the Future, Shaping Tomorrow with Generative AI. The non-profit SOT event series was launched by Beacon House in 2000 to engage global communities in conversations that shape the future of schools and societies. I'd like to thank Google for Education, the lead sponsor for SOT 2023, and their partner, Tech Valley. Our titanium sponsor is UBL. Other key sponsors include My Backpack, MK Books, Allied Bank Limited, Habib Bank Limited, and Vateen. We also thank our SOT supporters, including Paramount Books and Nestle Pure Life, who have contributed to this year's event. My name is Aisha Ali, and I'm the school head for Beacon House Gulshan Campus, Rawalpindi. Please take a moment to note these important housekeeping points. Please ensure your cell phones are silent. Entry and exit points are the same. Always stay calm and follow directions. Please use the SOT app to scan the QR code for question and answer session and also for the feedback. Share your thoughts on social media using our hashtags, hashtag Guardians of the Future and hashtag SOT 2023. If you need assistance, our ushers are here to help you people. For questions, please either use the flashcards provided by the ushers or the mobile app. The panel discussion will last for about 45 minutes, followed by 15 minutes of question and answer session. Our third session for today is a panel discussion with the topic Legends in the Digital Era, Nurturing the Indigenous Narrative. The moderator for the session is Dr. Osama Siddiqui. Dr. Osama, an accomplished academic, legal, and policy reform expert, and a published author. He specializes in convergence of law and policy, utilizing a diverse range of legal and social science research techniques. His advisory role extends to governments, justice sector institutions, international organizations, and foreign-funded programs in developing economies. Notably, he focuses on rule of law, justice sector reforms, human rights protection, and access to justice. Over to you, Dr. Sama.
Am I even louder now? Okay. Well, you know, us lawyers try and not use these because we're already quite intolerable, but still. We have a wonderful panel today. I believe one of our sort of colleagues is en route, but because of the disturbances outside, he may or may not be able to make it. He's in between two places right now. But let me introduce the rest of the panelists and carry on this conversation with them. Hamra Abbas Sahiba is a diverse luminary in the art world. With a holistic approach, she explores cultural history, violence, devotion, and more. Honored at the Asia Arts Game Changer Awards 2021, she is also a recipient of the prestigious Abraj Capital Art Prize. Notably, her large-scale public art intervention, Garden, was commissioned for Expo 2020, Dubai. There's a lot more to say about her, but I'm sure as we speak, a lot of her sort of many achievements will be sort of showcased here. Please come to the stage, Hamba. Thank you. Nasser Saeed Sahiba is the founder of GoRead.pk, which aims for a Pakistan where all kids love to read. With over 25 years of experience in education, she started as a primary school teacher and evolved into an education consultant, specializing in language arts and curriculum development. Please welcome. Nilofer Afridi Qazi Sahiba is a public policy specialist and author of Culinary Tales from Balochistan, which takes us on a journey through Pakistan's diverse food culture. Her video series, Pakistan on a Plate, explores undocumented culinary heritages. She is a dedicated philanthropist focusing on disaster relief and Rehabilitation in Balochistan. Please join us. So I was introduced as somebody who does policy work and legal work, and those are, I think, important sort of relevant themes to today's topic as well. But what I would like to perhaps showcase when I get the opportunity is the other side of what I do, and that is very relevant to indigenous narratives because I also write fiction. And fiction, as you know, is a narrative form which lots of possibilities. But perhaps a bit more of that later. So the theme we have is Legends in the Digital Era, Nurturing the Indigenous Narrative. I think it's important to sort of slightly unpack the term indigenous, first of all, right? So do we mean here by indigenous something which is local in the geographical sense? What is the local here? Because if you look at this region, it is a confluence of many cultures and civilizations, and the culture which has emerged here and the languages have really emerged from a melting pot, a civilizational melting pot. So what is the indigenous for one person may not be true for another person. How do you draw the line when something is foreign, and when does something foreign become indigenous? I think those are important categorizations and classifications we'll talk about. But I think by and large, we'll probably arrive at a consensus in terms of what we mean when we talk about indigenous. We have an artist here who uses local techniques. We have an educationist who tells local stories to local children, often using local languages. We have someone who talks about local cuisine and cuisine as a narrative form. So I think we'll talk about that. But what do you juxtapose it against? So against the indigenous, what is it? Is it the foreign? Is it the alien? Are we talking about the local and the global? I think one thing which we can safely arrive at is that there is a larger sort of consensus in terms of a few things which do define us collectively as we live in this part of the world, as Pakistanis. Some of us may try and define our sort of identity in a much narrower and parochial fashion. Others may be more multifarious and dynamic about it. I mean, speaking for myself, I draw my roots from Mohenjo-daro, but I also very much feel connected with the Islamic civilization. For me, the language Urdu, Punjabi is my native language, but Urdu is a great cross between Hindi and Sanskrit and Turkish and Arabic and Persian. But there is also this geographical region and this current political identity, of course, only as old as 1947, which is also part of my identity. But there is also the South Asian identity, there's the global South identity, there's the less developing countries identity. So we live with multiple complex identities. There's a part of me which is Western. I'm talking to you in English, I got educated abroad, I write in English. So I think in some ways it's important to not define ourselves too narrowly. But that's my take on indigenous. But I think it will be very useful if we start off by asking our panelists not only in terms of how they envision the word indigenous, and then perhaps connect it a little bit by explaining what they do and how does the indigenous reflect in that. So maybe I can just start with you and then we can move onwards.
Hello. Hello, everyone. So my name is Hamra Abbas, and I am an interdisciplinary artist. I create works in many different forms. I have dealt with performance and digital media, sculpture and painting, and all kinds of art practices. But more recently, and also I've lived for most part of my working career in Berlin and Boston. But once I returned to Pakistan, I was able to find local, I don't particularly use the word indigenous forms, but more traditional practices. So I was able to find myself a local practice which is called marble inlay that started in the 17th century, an import from Italy, apparently from what I know. And so I was able to use this particular art form in my work and create new works. My works are about this time and this age, and they speak to current themes that are practiced in contemporary art today. But the form that it takes is one that was practiced in the same way hundreds of years ago. And it is today my choice, even when I have a very easy access to the use of machines like CNC and water jet to cut and polish my works. My preference is to do it with hand only. Not because I'm against machines, but because with doing things with hand, we still have something more superior. We can create something more superior than that is made with machines. So, thank you.
So, I think that's very, so I can immediately think about connections and disconnections. So, I mean, the entire sort of primacy of doing something by hand, you know, a handicraft, artisan, that is something which is common to the entire world, right? In many ways, traditional handicrafts, traditional art forms do face a threat. I mean, there are places where there are, of course, niche markets which are incredibly lucrative and people have managed to make an industry out of it. But in a lot of places, because of mass production of goods and mass production of items and prices, that's a global phenomenon, right? So is that a global phenomenon which actually also impacts your kind of work, or is your work so much of a specialized artistic endeavor that actually manages to stay afloat despite these global sort of trends towards uniformity and mass production and cost and cheap goods?
So I make contemporary art, of course. It's created in limited quantity because everything is done with hand. There is only certain amount of works that I can produce. And I work with a wonderful, wonderful team of people that I have gotten to know over 7-8 years that I've been making this work. And together we are able to make works that are extremely well received in the world today. So yeah.
So I think that's an interesting example perhaps of where the traditional has actually managed to carve out a niche in the global, right? And that may be not necessarily true for other kinds of traditional or sort of indigenous narratives. But one last sort of follow-up question, that may be a different situation because I can point out others where there is a contestation, but I think this is an important point. Not everything is a contestation, right? So has it been an issue at all to, one thing is the craft side of it. One is the entire genealogy of artistic ideas, right, which germinates or emerges from the past. So जो हमारा जो मुगल काम, जो miniature का काम है, जिसको redefine किया गया है, और बहुत से आर्टिस्ट जिनका हमें पता है पाकिस्तानी who've done very well abroad, आपके ख्याल में कोई कॉम्प्रोमाइज़ हमें कई दफ़ा करना पड़ता है जब हम उस काम को एक ग्लोबल मार्केट के लिए मार्केट करते हैं, उसकी जो आइडिया या उसके फॉर्म के अंदर है? बिकॉज फिक्शन में तो मुझे पता है ये इशू है, मैं आपको एग्जांपल दूं कि जो दुनिया है लिटरेरी फिक्शन की अंग्रेज़ी की, it's a very incestuous, a very closed world. They pick up only a very few books from the global south, and barring a few exceptions, these are books जिनकी themes वो हैं जो उनके ख्याल में वेस्टर्न ऑडियंस को पढ़नी चाहिए. क्या यहाँ पे जो कहानी बता रही है, लेट्स से मिनिएचर आर्ट, आप अपने काम के अलावा भी अगर पाकिस्तानी कंटेम्प्रेरी आर्ट को देखें, उसके अंदर तो कोई ये मसला नहीं आया या उसकी ऑडियंस बिल्कुल डिफरेंट है और इससे इस पॉलिटिक्स से दूर है?
मुझे नहीं लगता. The 20 or so years that I've seen the practice of miniature painting practiced by my contemporary artists and myself as well, the thing is that yes, the form is taken from the past, but I feel that traditional practices are never static or still in their time. They're also always evolving and adapting to time and adding to the everyday expression. So in the same manner, the artists that appropriated this particular art form over the years, they were able to connect them with contemporary themes because they were, they were connecting their work to the present day time and age, and their works were and are relevant to this time and understood by the audiences today. So I think there was no problem for them to take their work to the world stage and get really appreciated for it. It's very interesting that in Pakistan, interestingly, miniature painting is what actually introduced contemporary Pakistani art to the world through wonderful artist examples such as Shazia Sikandar and Imran Qureshi, who took from miniature painting something they wanted and created something completely different as well. You know, they experimented with scale, they experimented with form, and they took miniature painting to great heights.
Okay. That's great to know, and that's one of those, I guess, rosier stories. नसर साहिबा, आप बच्चों के लिए जो अदब है उस पर बहुत काम करती हैं, आपने उनके लिए कहानियाँ लिखी हैं, आप उसको पॉपुलराइज करती हैं, डिसेमिनेट करती हैं. आपके ख्याल में ये क्यों अहम है कि हम बाकी दुनिया में जो इतनी अच्छी कहानियाँ अब लिखी जा रही हैं सिर्फ उनका तर्जुमा करके अपने बच्चों को ना दें, बल्कि अपनी कहानियाँ सुनाएं? क्या तमाम कहानियाँ बच्चों की यूनिवर्सल नहीं होती? क्या कोई पाकिस्तानी कहानी पाकिस्तानी बच्चों को बताना ज़रूरी?
ये बहुत अच्छा सवाल है आपका. तो जब मैंने gori.pk 4 साल पहले इस ऑर्गेनाइजेशन को फाउंड किया, so it was basically we are a movement of story readers. And the reason why I thought this was important is that I was in education in the elite sector, but also in the last, I would say 7-8 years in that education that the majority of children in Pakistan are receiving. And what really, really stood out to me was the fact that children are not hearing stories. There is very little joy in children's life. The reason why I'm telling you this background is that gori.pk started on this premise, is that how difficult is it going to be to bring joy into their life with stories. Every child, it's as important as nourishment. जब मैंने ये सोचा, मैंने ये ऑर्गेनाइजेशन फॉर्म की, तो मेरे साथ बहुत ऑब्वियसली मुझे काफ़ी सारी क्रिटिसिज्म ये मिली कि आप अजम्पशंस पे काम कर रही हैं. आपको कैसे पता कि बच्चे कहानी सुनना चाहते हैं? बच्चे तो डिजिटल में इंटरेस्टेड हैं, आप कहानी अपनी उसमें डालें, स्क्रीन पे डालें. फिर कहा आपको कैसे पता कि लोग कहानी सुनाना चाहते हैं? तो इस चक्कर में मैंने फिर ये किया कि 1 साल अपने पास एक किताब रखे, और मैं जहाँ जाती थी मेरे पास वो किताब होती थी, और जहाँ मुझे बच्चे मिलते थे पब्लिक स्पेसेस में, मैं उनको किसी न किसी तरीके से कहानी सुनाती थी. तो एक चीज़ तो तय हो गई कि बच्चे कहानी सुनना चाहते हैं. बच्चे अपने स्क्रीन्स छोड़ के, और कुछ स्कूल्स में बड़े बड़े बच्चे 16-17 साल के जो बहुत शरारतें कर रहे होते थे, वो प्लीड करते थे जब वो देखते थे कि मैं छोटे बच्चों को कहानी सुना रही हूँ, तो खैर वो आके बैठते थे. अब जब हमने फॉर्मली इस मूवमेंट को लॉन्च करने की कोशिश की का सोचा, तो मैंने कहा ये एंगेजमेंट तो मैजिकल है, इसमें मैं और क्या डाल सकती हूँ जिसकी बच्चों को ज़रूरत है, जिसको पाकिस्तानी बच्चों को जिसकी ज़रूरत है. तो मैंने ये नोटिस किया कि हमारे बच्चों को अपने, जिसको आप कहेंगे इंडिजिनस स्टोरीज़, टेल्स, नॉलेज, उसका इल्म नहीं है. अगर लाइब्रेरीज़ हैं तो उसमें डोनेटेड किताबें हैं. मैं उन स्कूलों की बात कर रही हूँ जो कि गरीब बच्चों के स्कूल होते हैं. वो डोनेटेड किताबें कार्टन्स में आ जाते हैं, उसको कोई नहीं देखता कि उसका कंटेंट क्या होता है. तो खैर वो भी हार्डली बच्चे पढ़ रहे होते हैं. लेकिन एक ये बहुत बड़ी कमी थी कि इनको ये नहीं पता कि इनकी अपनी कहानियाँ क्या हैं. यहाँ तक कि मैं एक स्कूल में कहानी सुनाने गई जो कि उसका नाम है ब्रिज स्कूल, कराची में, और वहाँ पे जो बच्चे हैं वो ज़्यादातर कचरा जो उठाते हैं, जिसको हम रैग पिकर्स कहते हैं या कचरे वाले बच्चे कहते हैं, वो बच्चे वहाँ पे होते हैं. वो बड़ी शौक़ से कहानी सुनते थे. एक कहानी उनको मैंने सुनाई जिसका नाम, जो प्लास्टिक पोल्यूशन के बारे में था. एक कछुआ है, वो फंस जाता है, और बहरहाल वो जो भी होता है, और उसको मछेरे जो हैं WWF के, ट्रू स्टोरी, ये बचा लेते हैं. अब एक ये लोकल कहानी थी हमारी. जब मैंने बच्चों से डिस्कशन किया जो हमारे प्रोग्राम का हिस्सा है, तो उनमें से कोई बच्चा ये नहीं जानता था कि मैं जो काम कर रहा हूँ वो कितना अहम काम है. They were not aware. They were called the कचरे वाले बच्चे, whereas they were heroes, right? So तो इसीलिए फिर मैंने कहा कि ये बहुत ज़रूरी है कि हमारे बच्चों को अपने रूट्स, और रूट्स का मतलब सिर्फ ये नहीं है कि सिंधी हैं तो सिंधी, बलोची हैं तो बलोची, बल्कि अपने मुल्क के जो भी कहानियाँ हैं वो सुनाई जाएं. विजडम ऑफ प्रैक्टिस में मैं बहुत बिलीव करती हूँ. तो बहुत सारे हमारे पुराने तरीके हैं जो कि हमको नहीं पता हैं, लेकिन जिसमें बहुत विजडम है. तो एक ये बात थी. दूसरी बात ये थी कि हम अपने बच्चों को, टू आंसर योर क्वेश्चन, हम उनको अलग नहीं करना चाहते कि जी पाकिस्तान एक पॉकेट है, ये हमारी कहानियाँ हैं और बस आप सिर्फ ये नहीं, हमारे बच्चे जो हैं, द वर्ल्ड इज़ रियली स्मॉल, सो वी रियली बिलीव इन द कॉन्सेप्ट ऑफ शेयर्ड ह्यूमैनिटी। तो हम ऐसी भी किताबें लिखते हैं जो अफ्रीका के एक जंगल में जब ड्राउट आ जाता है तो वहाँ का एक हीरो किस तरीके से उनको जलगढ़ों में पानी पहुँचाता है। तो इस तरीके से बच्चों की वोकैबुलरी बढ़ रही है और उनको वो फिर कनेक्ट करते हैं दोनों चीज़ों को। सो माई अंडरस्टैंडिंग ऑफ इंडिजिनस इज़ नॉट ओनली लोकल, इट इज़ वेयर एवर योर एक्सपीरियंसेस कम फ्रॉम।
लेकिन रिलेटेबिलिटी आपके ख्याल में ज़्यादा है अगर इर्द गिर्द की कहानियाँ होंगी? रिलेटेबिलिटी चले एक बात है, उसकी कॉम्प्रिहेंशन उनकी बेहतर है उसकी वजह से, क्या नॉर्मेटिवली अपनी कहानियों के अंदर कोई ऐसी ख़ास बात होती है जिसको हम अक़दार की बात करते हैं, नॉर्म्स की बात करते हैं? अच्छा, अब उसमें एक मसला भी है चूँकि कई नॉर्म्स बड़ी प्रॉब्लमेटिक भी हो जाती हैं, राइट? सो कई दफ़ा हम इंडिजिनस नैरेटिव से इस्केप भी चाहते हैं, चूँकि वो जो इंडिजिनस नैरेटिव है वो हमारे माशरे की डोमिनेंट फोर्स का नैरेटिव है या वो एक एक्सप्लॉयटेटिव नैरेटिव है, लेकिन अगर उसको हम छोड़ दें, जो लोकल एम्पावरिंग नैरेटिव्स हैं उनके अलावा उसकी पॉलिटिक्स को छोड़ दें, क्या वैल्यू सिस्टम एक ऐसी चीज़ है जिसके लिए ये अहम हो जाता है कि हम अपने लोकल कॉन्टेक्स्ट को देखें?
देखिए, मेरा ख्याल है कि more than 50% children need to see themselves in the stories that they are listening to and that they are the pictures that they are looking at, ठीक है? उस चीज़ की कमी थी। बहुत बेहतरीन लिटरेचर हिस्टोरिकली हमारे पास बच्चों का मौजूद है, लेकिन वो इस तरीके से पब्लिश नहीं हुआ है जिसमें कि इलस्ट्रेशंस अट्रैक्टिव हैं जो बच्चों को अपनी तरफ खींचें। तो गो रीड ने ये कोशिश किया है कि जी बच्चे अपने को अपनी उन कहानियों में देखते हैं, नानी को देखते हैं, दादी को देखते हैं, दादा को देखते हैं, जहाँ पे हमारे अपने इंडिजिनस कुछ कहानियों में या नॉर्म्स में मसले हैं, उनको भी हम कहानियों के थ्रू एड्रेस करते हैं। तो हमारी प्रोटैगनिस्ट अक्सर लड़की होती है, तो हमारी लड़की होती है, लड़की के बाप के साथ रिश्ता और इस तरीके से जो दोनों होते हैं, लेकिन हम उसको भी ब्रेक करते हैं कि जी लड़की की तालीम के साथ उसने किस तरीके से, in a non-patronizing way.
Sure.
So our books, that's what we try to do.
Fantastic. Nilofer, when I look at your beautiful book, which you have also displayed over there are multiple things which immediately strike, one. And one of them is, of course, that comparatively very little has been written about cuisine. And, when you highlight a region or a country's cuisine or any other aspect of culture, you in many ways showcasing that place as a place which matters, right, in the global arena, but also telling people who they are. The fact that it's about Balochistan is also incredibly evocative because in our federal context, and given the state of the federation and various other things, that almost also seems like an act of, empowerment, because you're saying this is a place which is not only neglected in various political ways, but we also don't quite know it in terms of what all it has to offer, the diversity of cuisine and all that. I can imagine those kinds of imperatives which must have been, behind writing it. Could you describe a bit more, considering that you do a lot of other things as well, why this particular project struck you as a project worth doing? And what was the process of it?
Thank you, Osama, and thank you, Beacon House, the School of Tomorrow, for organizing this Festival of Thought. To begin with, to answer the question, what is indigenous? Of course, there are many, many facets to that terminology, and we've heard some of them from the panelists. In the context of my work, indigenous means the invisible. So the focus of a lot of my attention is bringing the invisible into the world of documentation, which is an acknowledgement of its existence in the many facets, whether it's in our mind, a mindscape, in our narratives, in our understanding, in our truth. It is a process of acknowledgement.
Sure.
And my audience is Pakistan. I write in English, and that's because that is the language of my thought and my education. I wish I could write in Pashto and Bravi and Balochi, but this is a first. So it is an acknowledgement of, and one hopes that it is a stepping stone in many ways, as you said. It is a beginning, of documenting a perspective of 44% of this country from a shifted lens.
Sure.
I use food for multiple reasons. One is the question of what is Pakistani food. If I ask the audience in front of us, I would not want to presuppose, and we don't have time, but almost, I would say with a surety of 80%, that the food items or the recipes that you will mention will be either Mughlai or Kashmiri. And I would explain to you why that is the case. So, but is that the sum total of Pakistan? Like we were just, Hamra so beautifully mentioned, miniature was the primary, launching pad of, the globalization of acknowledgement and, sort of the syncretic development of modern art form, local and international in the modern era. We have a tendency in this country to primarily focus on that. That which comes out of the Mughal experience, the Islamic identity that we have associated with that, and at the expense of the invisible. Sadly, that's all of Pakistan. So I capture that through the invisible histories, but I use recipes as an example. Sadly, there are invisible, so many recipes that I couldn't write one book for Pakistan on a plate. Imagine, there are so many invisible recipes, and when I mean invisible, I mean not in a dhaba, unpublished, not in a restaurant, basically undocumented. So I have had to write province-specific books exploring and documenting our culinary and food stories and recipes because there are so many which are invisible.
So, ये आपने जो invisibility का लफ्ज़ यूज़ किया बड़ा अच्छा किया. इससे मुझे ये ख्याल आया कि अभी तक जो हम बात कर रहे थे वो एक some kind of an amorphous national identity की हम बात कर रहे हैं, invisibility as Pakistanis. Of course, there are multiple islands of invisibility within our own country, right? चाहे वो regional level पे है, linguistic level पे है, disempowerment की जो, so हम जब indigenous की बात करते हैं, there are so many shades and sort of dimensions within indigenous. अच्छा, मुझे दो writers का यहाँ ख्याल आ रहा है, जिनका मैं जिक्र करना चाहूँगा, चूँकि ताल्लुक़ है जो मैं बात कहने लगा हूँ इसी से जो हम बात कर रहे हैं. एक चिंगम्बाम्बा अडीची हैं जो कि एक नाइजीरियन ऑथर हैं जो बहुत अच्छा लिखती हैं, अमेरिकाना उनका नावल है, और अगर आप नाइजीरिया के बारे में पढ़ें तो आपको बहुत ममासलत नज़र आती है पाकिस्तान के साथ. और अडीची का एक बहुत वायरल यूट्यूब लेक्चर है जिसमें वो ये बात कहती हैं कि हम लोगों की एक कहानी नहीं है, और वो एक कहानी भी वो जो कि वेस्ट सुनाता है. हम बहुत डाइवर्स लोग हैं, हमारी बहुत सी कहानी हैं, हमें अपनी कहानियाँ खुद बयान करनी पड़ेंगी. एक तो ये बात. दूसरी बात ये कि जो मैंने एक थोड़ी सी हकीर सी कोशिश की कि मैं उर्दू में लिखूं अंग्रेज़ी में लिखने के बाद, और ये मेरा पहला नावल जो पिछले महीने में छपा, इसका ताना बाना जब मैं इंडिजिनस की बात करता हूँ तो जिन चीज़ों से जाके मिलता है तो मुझे लगता है कि बहुत सी इंडिजिनस चीज़ें हैं जिनको हमने सदियों पहले सप्रेस किया, जिसका मसाइल अभी तक हम उसका सामना कर रहे हैं, और कुछ हमारी आँखों के सामने इरेज हो रहे हैं. दो एग्ज़ाम्पल्स. आपको मुंशी प्रेमचंद का पता होगा जो बहुत मशहूर एक हिंदी के और उर्दू के मुसन्निफ़ हैं. उन्होंने 1908 या गालिबन 1909 में अपने एक अफ़साने में, और कई अफ़सानों में एक्चुअली उस ज़माने में, इस चीज़ का जिक्र किया कि अंग्रेज़ का लाया हुआ कानूनी जो निज़ाम है वो ऑलरेडी हाईजैक हो चुका है. सो यानी कि ये जो हमारे जहन में एक नोशन है ना कि ये एक सिस्टम बड़ा कमाल का चलता था. मेरा तो PhD का काम जो है वो है ही कॉलोनियल लीगल सिस्टम पे. तो अफसाने में भी अगर आप देखें तो हमें पता चलता है कि एक बैरून मुल्क से जो चीज़ ला के हम पे इम्पोज की गई, हम उसको पूरी तरह इंडिजनाइज ना कर पाए. वो कई किस्मों के टाउट बताते हैं जो अदालतों के गिर्द फिरते हैं, और जज जो थे उस ज़माने में भी पैसे लेते थे. सो एक तो वो बात. मेरा ये जो नावल है उसके अंदर ये जो अलमिया है हमारे निज़ाम अदल व इंसाफ का, जो एक ऐसी ज़ुबान में है जो बहुत से लोग यहाँ समझते भी नहीं हैं, और जिसके अंदर बहुत सी कानूनी इस्तिलाहात हैं जो लोगों को समझ नहीं आती, is a continuation of the mid-19th century codification of law experimentation in South Asia, right? So there has never been in India or Pakistan or Bangladesh a very wholesale questioning whether we need to modify this system very meaningfully in order to make it locally relevant. So this is a narrative which is once again, in many ways, alien. I call it an alien justice. The other thing which I see, because this is a book which is both a tribute to Lahore, but it's also a lament for Lahore, because Lahore, as we know, is erasing in front of us. So the other narrative, the indigenous narrative which one sees disappearing before one's eyes, is the architecture. You know, the traditional architecture of the walled city, जिसमें हिंदू एलिमेंट भी था, इंडो सैरेसेनिक स्टाइल भी है आपका, उसकी जगह सीमेंट के प्लाजे और फिर जो हाउसिंग सोसाइटीज़, जो इरेजर है ऑफ योर आर्किटेक्चरल नैरेटिव, इंडिजिनस आर्किटेक्चरल नैरेटिव, वो एक और इशू है. सो मेरा तो ये मानना है, चूँकि आपने जो बात की, that is a very heartening thing, that you know, in some ways, some of our traditional arts have been able to reinvent themselves on their own terms and go and be popular in the West. But unfortunately, for a lot of other people, for a lot of other craftsmen, that is not true. And therefore, that question is still there. So there is a certain politics to this entire indigenous nature of a narrative and what is happening to it globally. But आप मुझे ये बताएं, now reverse the order. If I could sort of take this forward a bit further, looking at the politics of the indigenous and the global, or the majoritarian and the minority, or the center and the periphery, or the metropolis, you know, whichever dichotomy you may want to talk about it. Do you think that is, you know, when you actually take a project like this forward, how, in more practical terms, is it possible to then start a discourse around it, which is a discourse of acceptance, a discourse of recognition, a discourse of embracing diversity? Chunki mind you, aap shayad agree kare mujhse, one very large sort of element in a lot of countries, especially in countries where democratic norms weak ho, is a thing of centralization. Ek qaum, ek zuban, ek team, ek curriculum, you know. So, इस centralization जो force है, जो कि एक तरह की forced unity है, diversity को जो hurt करती है, इस माहौल में आपको ये battle fight करने का आपका experience कैसा रहा है?
शुक्रिया ओसामा ये पूछने के लिए. मैं दो चार चीज़ों को conflate करूँगी, especially the incredible work that Nusrat ji is doing with storytelling books for children. I had to publish my book in England. Why? Because there was not a single publisher in Pakistan interested. A primary research book, which is not academic. It's historical, it's a cookbook, it's cultural, it has lots of pictures. It's a first in a coffee table book, and yet it was not of interest to Pakistani publishers. Now imagine how many other potential researchers, writers, who have some, you know, fascinating local, indigenous, modern, quirky, you know, relevant to a certain age group, the diversity of Pakistan, but there's no incentive, there's no grant. Where will they, why would they? You know, I was privileged in many ways to overcome those things. So for example, in my relief work in Jafrabad, where I effectively have adopted 6 villages, I am desperately wanting to set up literacy centers. In which language, Balochi and Bravi, am I going to get books, storytelling books? In fact, we had this conversation. Am I going to have to use Sindhi? Am I going to have to use Urdu? Because there are no Balochi story books. I don't know if they are even curriculum which is, you know, of relevant for life skills and numeracy and thought-provoking, interesting curriculum for children who have never seen a generation in their village educated. So what kind of content can I have access to? Then, for example, even in the translation, where am I going to find the money for it? You know, like, so no matter what level of goodwill, what level of collaboration one attempts to find, the landscape or the financial scape or the interest scape, the demand and the supply just doesn't match outside of the rhetoric of acknowledging that Pakistan is a diverse and everyone has a right to access within that diverse context.
Some of the impediments and challenges, of course, are more generic as well, right? So there is, as you're saying, a paucity of demand for something like this, and an absence of meaningful grants. By the way, a lot of grant money gets wasted, as we know, right? A lot of scholarships, a lot of grant money, unfortunately in this city gets wasted as well. And I try and not sound very pessimistic at all at fora like these, because I think there's a lot of pessimism around in any case. One should tell hopeful stories, and I think all three of your stories are incredibly hopeful stories, but I think it's gainsaid to underline the fact that the publishing industry in Pakistan faces a crisis, right? 22 crore ka mulk hai, 22 publisher हैं जिनमें से 7 functional हैं, 118 किताबों की दुकानें हैं जिनमें से जिनको आप वाकई कह सकते हैं वो शायद 12 होंगी, 1000 या 2000 से ज़्यादा किताब नहीं बिकती. That's an abysmal number. And I think हर चीज़ हम government पे blame नहीं कर सकते. I think we need to also look at ourselves, especially people who can afford to buy books, donate them to libraries, disseminate them, कि हम अपने पैसे कहाँ खर्च कर रहे हैं. अगर किताब पे और local art पे और local craft पे नहीं कर रहे तो किस चीज़ पे कर रहे हैं. आप बताइएगा कि आपका जो एक्सपीरियंस है, चूँकि अगर हम अपने करिकुलम को देखें तो मुझे तो ये लगता है कि 4 लोग मिल के बैठते हैं और ये फैसला करते हैं कि दुनिया की सबसे जो बोरिंग कहानी है और उसको बहुत ही बुरे तरीके से लिखा गया है, उसको उससे भी बुरे तरीके से छाप के तो वो पेश किया जाए. अगर हम अदब को देखें फॉर एग्जांपल, तो कुर्रतुल ऐन हैदर का एक नावल है मेरे भी सनम खाने, जो मैं सिर्फ इस वजह से नहीं पढ़ पाया, बड़ा मशहूर नावल है, कि वो जिस पब्लिशर ने, मशहूर पब्लिशर ने छापा है, उसने बिल्कुल तवज्जो नहीं दी कि उसका कवर कैसा, और कवर से फ़र्क पड़ता है. तो कवर पे एक ब्लॉन्ड खातून की तस्वीर है जो 4 हिस्सों में डिवाइडेड है. अब उसका कुर्रतुल ऐन हैदर और उनकी तहजीब और उस तमाम चीज़ से क्या ताल्लुक़ होगा. निसाब की किताबें तो उससे भी ज़्यादा उनको दिल देख के बल्कि दिल बुझ सा जाता है. तो आप इसको जब डिसेमिनेट कर रही हैं, क्या प्राइवेट सेक्टर में भी कई मैंने काफ़ी बुरी किताबें देखी हैं, आपको लगता है कि जब अच्छी चीज़ बनाई जाए तो लोग तवज्जो देंगे? इशू सप्लाई साइड का है कि बनती ही नहीं है, या क्या मसला है?
तो हमारा एक्सपीरियंस जो था वो बहुत डिफरेंट था.
अच्छा.
और सच्ची बात तो ये है कि जब मैं इस काम में आई तो मुझे नहीं पता था कि इसका आउटकम क्या होगा. तो इसका थोड़ी सी एक थोड़ा सा बैकग्राउंड ये था कि मेरा इरादा जो है इस प्रोग्राम के लिए कहानियाँ ख़ुद लिखने का नहीं था. जब ये प्रोग्राम डिज़ाइन किया तो था कहानियाँ लेंगे, लोगों को लेंगे, उनको कनेक्ट करेंगे और उनको बच्चों तक भेजेंगे. एंड दैट वाज व्हाट वी वर गोइंग टू बी. But interestingly, when I started looking for stories, and just before Go Read started, I did a project with a consultancy project where I was asked to design a digital curriculum for children in kindergarten to grade 5 in English language arts का. तो मैंने सबसे पहले तो उनसे ये कहा कि देखें इसको मैं कहानी के ज़रिए कर सकती हूँ क्या, क्योंकि मैंने बहुत क्लासरूम्स देखे हैं जहाँ पे आप बच्चों को अंग्रेज़ी पढ़ा रहे हैं, उनको समझ नहीं आती है, वो 3 जुमले रट लेते हैं. तो वो काफ़ी शुरू में स्केप्टिकल थे. फिर उन्होंने कहा अच्छा, मैंने कहा आप अपनी कहानियाँ दे दें मुझे जो आपके इजाज़त है करिकुलम, मैं उनको अडेप्ट करूँगी नेशनल करिकुलम के साथ. उन्होंने मुझे किताबें भेजी, वो इतनी बोरिंग थी, वो इतनी बेरंग, तस्वीरें तो खैर चलें उसमें नहीं थी, लेकिन मैं इतनी कहानियों की शौकीन हूँ, मेरे अपने ग्रैंड चिल्ड्रन हैं, उनको मैं सुनाती हूँ. एंड आई वाज लाइक ये कहानियों से मैं कुछ नहीं कर सकती. तो मैंने एक कहानी ख़ुद लिखी और उसको नेशनल करिकुलम से अलाइन किया. उसके बाद मैंने उनको वो दिया तो उनको पसंद आ गई वो आइडिया. तो फिर उन्होंने कहा अच्छा नसर सईद जो है वो सिर्फ कहानियाँ लिखें, बाकी काम. उससे मैं ऑथर नहीं हूँ, मैं ऑथर हूँ लेकिन मैं पब्लिश्ड ऑथर नहीं हूँ, और मैं उस वक्त से पहले मैंने कहानियाँ नहीं लिखी थी. तो मुझे बड़ी इंकरेजमेंट मिली, मैंने उनके लिए कहानियाँ लिखी, कोई 30 कहानियाँ लिखी, जो कि फिर टैबलेट्स पे उन्होंने करिकुलम को सिखाने में उसको पेश किया. अब जब गो रीड, शुक्रिया, जब गो रीड शुरू करने का वक्त आया तो कहानियाँ नहीं मिल रही थी. मुझे ख्याल आया अच्छा वो कहानियों पे मेरी राइट्स हैं, चलो मैं उनको डेवलप करती हूँ, क्योंकि ऑर्गेनाइजेशन शुरू हो गई थी हमें बच्चों तक. तो मैंने फिर उन कहानियों को बेहतर किया, अंग्रेज़ी में भी लिखा, उर्दू में भी लिखा, अच्छे इलस्ट्रेटर्स से उनको बहुत मेहनत करके इलस्ट्रेट करवाया. अब जी पैसे कहाँ से आएंगे, क्योंकि पब्लिशर्स आर नॉट इंटरेस्टेड, एंड इफ़ दे आर they have a lot of limitations for an organization like ours. आपको जी royalty मिलेगी, आप ये नहीं कर, हम तो अपनी कहानियों को लेके उड़ना चाहते थे. इसका मतलब है कि हमारी तस्वीरें हम जिस तरीके से चाहें यूज़ करें, हम रोल प्लेस करें. तो मैंने बहुत बोल्ड स्टेप लिया कि मैं इनको सेल्फ पब्लिश करूँगी. जब अब सेल्फ पब्लिश करने के लिए पैसा कहाँ से आएगा, तो आई विल रियली फील हम्बल इन सेइंग कि बहुत सारे ऐसे लोग हैं पाकिस्तान में जो चाहते हैं कि हमारे बच्चों तक अच्छी कहानियाँ जाएं, लोकल इंडिजिनस उसमें कंटेंट हो, कल्चर को वो रिफ्लेक्ट करें, और मुझे डोनर मिल जाते हैं. और वो मेरी जितनी किताबें हैं वो किसी न किसी डोनर, और अब क्योंकि अब हमारी थोड़ी पहचान हो गई है थोड़े काम का, तो मल्टीनेशनल ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस या philanthropists वो हमें इस चीज़ के लिए हम मेहनत करते हैं.
That's a heartening story.
So that is how our books go, and we have gone into reprint. तो हमारा ये था कि 1000 के बाद अब हम 3000 छाप रहे हैं.
So there's always a demand for good books. It's just that you managed to put this thing together. Hamra, I wanted to ask you about, do you subscribe to the idea that art also is essentially political? All art has a political messaging. Is that something which you subscribe to, and if you do, is that a conscious act for you or a subconscious act?
I think, yes, in one way, all art can be seen as political. अगर वो बहुत ही instantly political ना भी देखने को आपको लगे, लेकिन उसका एक मैसेज अगर बहुत ही फॉर्मल काम है, ब्यूटिफिकेशन भी उसके अंदर का एलिमेंट है, but I think it all comes down to some form or the other conveying a political message. लेकिन अभी जो नसर और नीलोफर बात कर रही थी अपने एक्सपीरियंस के हवाले से कि किस तरह से उन्होंने अपनी बुक्स पब्लिश की एंड दे वर एबल टू सेंड देयर मैसेज अक्रॉस, आई थॉट दैट I would share this experience of mine that was to look at the local practices through a foreign eye. मैं क्योंकि बहुत साल मुल्क से बाहर रही, इनफैक्ट मेरा सारा करियर प्रैक्टिस मुल्क से बाहर रहा, तो जब मैं वापस पाकिस्तान आई और मैं वहाँ पर एक अमेरिकन आर्टिस्ट हैं उनका काम बहुत देखती थी, तो जब मैं वापस पाकिस्तान आई और मैंने यहाँ पे एक ख़ास मॉन्यूमेंट को देखा, और वो एक बहुत मिनिमल सा मॉन्यूमेंट था लाहौर फोर्ट में, तो मैंने ऐसे सोचा कि ये तो बिल्कुल ऐसे है जैसे सोलेविट ने बनाया हो. It could have been a perfect Solowit, but interestingly it was made some hundreds of years before Solowit, and that insight was very important for me because I thought that had I never left Pakistan, and I've seen this monument so many times in my life before, but I'd never appreciated it in a way that I'm appreciating it now. Being given this new way of looking, which is definitely of an outsider, which allowed me to appreciate and be more appreciative of what was here and then include it in my practice. And the first time I made works after that, I was told by my gallerist that it was one of the best works I've made. And so there was great acceptance and there was a ready audience for this work, which I made for the first time. So yeah.
Please.
Actually, Hamra, that is so reminiscent of when I was interested in Pakistan on a plate. I think it may have been, and many people have suggested, that because I spent the first 25 years of my life outside, I saw and was curious about Pakistan in a fashion that perhaps many people who live here take it for granted, or like it's invisible, you're not thinking from a slightly different lensing. So it resonates deeply that perhaps it is because one can compare or appreciate from a wider lens that you bring that or have certain expectations of Pakistan or the many Pakistans which are invisible, and you then are able to ask those questions, you know, that why?
I think there's a certain kind of cognitive dissonance when you're here, and you're also blinded to a lot of the reality. I think our sort of cloisters and our echoing chambers keep us away. I think it's also quite revealing, both when, as you rightly said, आप बाहर से जाके अपनी जगह को देखते हैं, अपने मुल्क को देखते हैं, and also when you look at outsiders looking at you, and oftentimes they have the eye because they are looking at things very differently to appreciate and to take out things. So, लेकिन I think जो एक चीज़ फिर से एहसास होता है वो ये है, how the majoritarianism or the dominance of perspectives can shape our worldview. And one example is you start picking up, for example, the genre of travelogues. Turns out most travelogues, the dominant travelogues have been written by Caucasian men, right? So अब किताबें आनी शुरू हुई हैं जिसमें Islamic travelers भी हैं, women travelers भी हैं. There's this amazing traveler called Freya Stark, this English woman who went to all these places, and Gertrude Bell and those people. तो feminist उसकी side भी है, brown लोगों की travelogue, you know, so वो perspectives जो हैं, चूँकि वो जो outward gaze है उसका भी issue है. I can see that there's some, जी बताइए.
So just one thing that's coming to my mind, because I'm always thinking with a children's perspective, is कि ये जो दो बातें जो नीलोफर ने और हमरा ने बोली हैं, क्योंकि बहुत सारे बच्चे हमारे मुल्क में ऐसे हैं जो बाहर नहीं जाएंगे, जिनको ये एक्सपोजर नहीं मिलेगा, तो कहानियों के मीडियम में अगर हम बहुत कॉन्शियसली जो कल्चर्स हम पोर्ट्रे करें वो सिर्फ पाकिस्तानी ना हो, वो ब्लेंड हो, तो हम इसको उनको भी इस पोजीशन में ला सकते हैं जहाँ वो देखें कि अच्छा ये इधर हो रहा है, हमारे पास तो ये हो रहा है, and comparison and growing with that.
And also I think it's important कि हम indigenous की over obsession में ये ना हो कि cosmopolitanism छोड़ दें. अच्छा, अब चूँकि कुछ सवाल आ रहे हैं और मैं ये चाहता था कि हम थोड़ा artificial intelligence पे बात ज़रूर करें. मेरी इसके बारे में मालूमात महदूद हैं, इस कॉन्फ्रेंस में मैंने कुछ सीखा है, लेकिन अच्छी बात है कि इन्होंने इस तरह टेक्नोलॉजी के साथ यहाँ के डिस्कोर्सेस को इनकॉर्पोरेट किया है. आप अपनी अपनी फील्ड्स में, और उसके साथ एक कल्चर का सवाल भी है जिसका मेरे ख्याल में जवाब हम चारों की तरफ से हाँ है, चूँकि सवाल है इस कल्चर समथिंग विच शुड बी पास्ड ऑन टू द नेक्स्ट जनरेशन. लेकिन उसका अगर आप एलेबोरेट करना चाहें ज़रूर कीजिए. मैं चाहूँगा आप बारी बारी अगर अपने काम और अपनी फील्ड से रिलेटेड अगर आप देखें कि जिस तरह से दुनिया चेंज हो रही है, दिस ब्रेव न्यू वर्ल्ड विच इज़ अनफोल्डिंग, एंड AI, how do you see it in terms of both a challenge perhaps but also as an opportunity? Can we start from here and then move on?
Artificial intelligence, I'm so sorry, I have no clue and no experience of AI, but the more I think of AI and VR and terms such as these, the more I pay gratitude to the fact that I can work with my own hands, and the more, you know, so I just, thank you. So that's it.
But let me challenge you and provoke you a bit. So what happens if next year there's an AI which takes your work, the entire body of work, and is intelligent enough to have new permutations and combinations of the same, and start supplying it not as a mass supply, because usko bhi pata hai market forces kya hai, but a more subsidized rate and does better marketing. Is that a real possibility? If it's not and you don't know about AI, maybe you and I should learn. Because we'd be out of business otherwise.
You know, actually, in my personal experience, so when I started, it was the time when cell phones were just, and computers were a new thing. So I've studied in times when there were no computers. And then I saw the computers came in, and then the cell phones came in. And so at that time, I was very digital savvy, so to speak. You know, I liked to be digital savvy, and I learned everything, and I indulged in digital art and made videos and installations. And so with time, I have purposefully gone back to a place where I think that I pay gratitude to be able to do things with the own hand and to learning of these techniques. I went to Singapore and I learned a very, very old technique called Gong Bi. It is one of the two Chinese painting techniques, and they paint on silk. And then I incorporated it with miniature painting, and then I created a new technique, so to speak, that only I paint in my view. So I take great pleasure in these things, and so far but of course I indulged in digital platforms such as electronic media, and see great hope in that too. I mean, we know all of us are following what is happening in Gaza today because of electronic media, and it's giving voice to people who do not have too much voice and sending their message across. So it is. So I see great hope in that part also.
What you do is obviously so uniquely human and so distinctive and so individualistic, and that is exactly what defines us. And imagining any future with AI, I mean, I'm sure all of us agree that we do not want to lose that, because that is who we are. Otherwise, we'll become machines, and we're not machines. Nasar, आपके लिए एक specific सवाल भी है, अगर आप चाहें तो उसका जवाब देना चाहें, अगर आप AI पे बात करना चाहें. Why don't you write for our generation and conduct storytelling sessions in cities?
Okay, interesting. मैं इसका भी AI का भी इसलिए देना चाह रही हूँ कि obviously मैं बहुत सोचती हूँ इन चीज़ों के बारे में. तो मैं अक्सर देखती हूँ कि AI and indigenous knowledge are often positioned in conflict with each other. Because I work in communities, and I have had some experiences where I have often thought about, if there was a merger of all the different things that are out there today. So for example, there's a fisherman's village in Karachi called Ibrahim Hedri, और वहाँ पे बहुत सारे मछेरे हैं और उनका generations वहाँ पे रहे हैं जिन्होंने ये काम किया है, लेकिन इस वक्त उनका बहुत ख़राब बिज़नेस है, वो बहुत बैकवर्ड हैं. और मैं उनके पास जब गई थी तो मैंने ये सोचा था कि वो कहते हैं हमारी अगली नस्ल ये काम नहीं करना चाहेगी क्योंकि उनको सक्सेस नहीं मिलती है. तो उस वक्त मैं ये सोचती थी कि अगर हम जो साइंटिफिक नॉलेज है और डेटा है उसको इन लोगों की एक्सपर्टीज़ और विजडम ऑफ एक्सपीरियंस, उनको पता है कि जी किस वक्त मछली मिलती है, कौन से पानी में मछली मिलती है, किधर, तो उसको कंबाइन करें और AI के साथ उसको जब मर्ज करेंगे. सो इफ़ इंडिजिनस नॉलेज एंड साइंटिफिक नॉलेज, डिजिटल नॉलेज एंड AI is merged together, I would love to see what that would produce.
And I think that's a very dynamic and progressive approach. I mean, as Iqbal also say, Javida peham rawan hardam jawan hai zindagi, and sabat ek taghayyur ko hai zamane mein. So the world will always change, and that's the nature of the beast, and human beings are also evolving. So I think it's important to sort of strike that balance between preserving what is essential to our individuality, to our diversity, to our plurality, but also not be obtuse about the fact that technology can actually take us to places, सितारों से आगे जहाँ और भी हैं वाली जो बात है. आप कुछ AI के बारे में कहना चाहेंगे?
एक तो artificial intelligence or is a regurgitation of existing information or knowledge already there, and being able to use technology to immediately put it back to you. But where there is invisibility, a lack of acknowledgement, that data hasn't been uploaded. So AI has absolutely no factor in that, because we are talking about pre-knowledge or the lack of documenting, bringing it into the landscape of knowledge. Then from there you can play it into and bring it into a modern tool. Tariq Banouri in an opening session earlier on had said something which has really stayed with me, because I have found AI or digital knowledge or internet knowledge as being pushed in Pakistan for meeting the gap of no teachers or bad teachers in rural areas, which of course have failed, and there are many reasons why it is a failure. But Tariq Banouri said something which I thought was very interesting. What he said was, AI frees up time for the mundane and the ritualistic stuff. But the creative part, the human part, the part that actually invents and the nuance, that remains human. That AI has no space and cannot be cannot replace that element, but it can free up time for providing a limited resource, which is the human being, to develop further. So my answer would be two-part. One is there's a huge sea of unacknowledged, undocumented data which isn't in AI, so that remains a black hole still. And on the other hand, AI, it does not replace the human being. It cannot.
So I have two reactions to that. That's a very interesting insight by Tariq. I also noted that. In some ways, it reminded me of the notion of slavery in ancient Greece, right? So slaves actually freed up time for the philosophers and the poets, but it was obviously a very exploitative system. With machines, you're imagining that there's no repression. But then I also think about whether we can really be able to predict the future, because even 25 years ago or 20 years ago, if you know, some of you here, the classic movie by Ridley Scott, Blade Runner, based on Philip K. Dick, a great sort of prescient American science fiction writer's short story. So they have actually created a kind of a cyborg, which has human emotions. And one of the most poignant scenes in Hollywood is that they decide to hunt down, because they become too human-like, these machines. So they try and hunt down all these models of these robots, which are very human-like. And Harrison Ford is the bounty hunter, and the last one whom they trap on a rooftop, and it's a beautiful scene with the rain falling down, has this memorable speech where he says that I was created in your image, right? And I now feel like you, and here you are putting me down. I'm not too sure about 50 years, 60 years from now, how artificial intelligence and all these experimentations are going to change robotics and how human-like they're going to be. Now they say that, you know, these regenerative AI can also, at some point in time, take over, because they have so much data now that that is enough for them to process it. But these are all sort of thoughts for the future, but I'm very glad that at least at this conference we are grappling with them. But just to wind up today's conversation, and thank you so much for your valuable insights, I think it's first of all incredibly important to see three stories of wonderful projects which, despite impediments, are doing so well and in their own ways are contributing to society. And I think in their own ways are also both preserving the indigenous in terms of what needs to be preserved or highlighted and showcased, but also grappling with the larger world, grappling with the larger audience, with more complex societal factors, grappling with an international market, grappling with a nation state which needs to better embrace its constituent parts. So thank you so much for your insights today on a topic which is obviously vast and complex and can be discussed more and more. Thank you also for the questions. We couldn't take all of them, but thank you for being such a patient and interested audience.
Thank you.